So the start of the story of Shen Yun actually begins on July 7th, 1952, or May 13th, 1951, to the birth of a man named Li Hongxi. We actually don't know his proper birthday because it varies depending on where you look. What doesn't vary is that he was born in the town of Gongzuling in Jilin province, which is right about this area. And that's about where the information ends, at least the info backed by more than one source. One unofficial biography was produced by a journalist, and the other appeared later when he founded his religion, something I'll definitely get into later. The first account states that his family was poor. The second one says that they were ordinary intellectuals, so the story changes a good bit depending on where you look. Both of the biographies say that he was compassionate and disciplined. They say that he was taught by Taoist and Buddhist masters from an early age. By 8 years old, he had acquired, quote, the superb great law with supernatural powers, end quote, which was supposed to include invisibility and levitation. Now, it is important to note that in Benjamin Penny's article, The Life and Times of Li Hongxi, Falun Gong and Religious Biography, he states, quote, a substantial part of this article is descriptive in nature, as both the essays I discuss are now generally unavailable and are difficult to obtain, end quote. So we can't even find these original books to look at them. This is because Li didn't want people to focus on him. He wanted people to focus on his teachings and not him as a person. So he asked the original biography to be taken out of print and the second one to not print at all. Anyways, the first one says that he was trained by a master who taught him to levitate and be invisible, Master Quan Zhui. And when he was 12, Quan left and a Taoist master, Baji Zhiren, taught him martial arts and physical skills. A fourth master taught him inner cultivation through Qigong. Around this time was the Cultural Revolution in China, so the biography states that the training mostly had to take place at night. The Cultural Revolution in China is its own very large thing, and I won't get deep into it, but I will explain briefly for those that don't know. While China was under control of a man named Mao Zedong, he initiated a social political movement. At this time, China was very communist, and Karl Marx believed that there should be no religion in a communist society, that it is, quote, the opioid of the masses. You might have heard that. Mao believed that this was a good idea and sought to purge traditional elements and spirituality from China. He even took it a step further to purge capitalist elements as well. This was not a good time for China. It was filled with violence and death from hundreds of thousands to millions. But there was a focus during all of this mess in destroying religion. Churches, mosques, and temples were closed and the clergy were sent to re-education camps. In Tibet, monasteries were demolished and monks and nuns were arrested and killed. I say all this because it sets the scene of how China as a country was spiritually after the revolution. Since this was happening to China during Li's upbringing, it would make sense that if he was studying Qigong under masters, this was why the training had to take place at night. It was very illegal at the time. In 1974, he began training with the fourth master, and Li's, quote, energy potency had reached a very high level, end quote. It is stated that in the 1980s, he married and had a daughter, but they remain unnamed. In 1982, Li moved to the city for civilian employment, implying that he had been in the military. In 1984, he began combining the teachings that he had received and that would become Falun Dafa, or Falun Gong. He changed it slightly to fit the masses, but he observed other masters of Qigong, and by 1989, he had finished his own system and began teaching it over the next 3 years with a small group of students. Falun Gong is a spiritual practice of whose key features are 5 meditative Qigong exercises and teachings similar to Buddhist and Taoist traditions. Falun Gong emphasizes the tenets of truthfulness, compassion, and tolerance. Adherents do exercises, study spiritual texts, and do their best to conform to the values. Values such as, quote, not hit back when attacked, not talk back when insulted, and abandon negative thoughts and behaviors, end quote. They are forbidden from killing animals, including for food, but aren't required to adopt a vegetarian diet. They are supposed to forego the want for material possessions. They also aren't encouraged to quit jobs or anything like that. Just give up the psychological attachments to those things. And of course, any relations outside of monogamous heterosexual marriage are considered immoral. Falun Gong was introduced to the public in China in 1992. In the early and mid-1990s, Falun Gong practitioners and their leader, Li Hongxi, had significant government support and positive coverage by the state-run media. Li was invited to give a lecture at the Chinese embassy in Paris at the government's invitation. People from all walks of life began taking up the practice, including Communist Party members. During this period, there was a lot of religions and beliefs that claimed to get you back into touch with your spirituality, and they were very popular during this time. As people in China longed to get back to their spiritual roots, they were taken away from them during the revolution. Sometimes people would gather to practice exercises, but for the most part it was self-discipline, not collective, so it didn't seem to have a political agenda. At the time, there was no criticism from the Chinese Communist Party. In an article from the Freedom House, it states, quote, "In July 1999, the spiritual discipline was abruptly banned. Prominent adherents were arrested, and anyone who continued practicing was pursued as an enemy of the state. Reports began emerging of Falun Gong believers being abducted, tortured, and even killed. The name of this practice, the name of its founder, and a wide assortment of homonyms became some of the most censored terms on the Chinese internet." End quote. People have always speculated about the quick turnaround of the Chinese Communist Party. Some believe that it was due to the growing popularity. There were more than 2,000 Falun Gong practice stations in Beijing alone. At the time, it was overtaking the 63 million members of the party, with approximately 7 million members to the belief. Others believe that it was at ideological competition with the government's Marxist ideology. Falun Gong promotes truthfulness, compassion, and tolerance as part of its worldview. There is also a public demonstration that over 10,000 practitioners gathered near the central government compound in Beijing. They wanted to request recognition and freedom from state intervention. This demonstration could have also gotten the government's anger. The Chinese media and state have explained their actions by saying that it was their way to move against an evil cult that had nefarious influence on society. International scholars have stated repeatedly that Falun Gong itself does not have the attributes of a cult. Others dispute this as well, saying that the religion itself is not structured like a cult, but Li Hongxi's influence over it makes it into one. Before the official ban in China, Li would charge a fee to help patients by removing their sicknesses with his magical power. He held training seminars and teaching classes. He promised his followers that by studying the Fa and reading his books, they could improve their health and even become gods or Buddhas. Before the ban, Li published 21 books and pamphlets. Good adherents bought all 21. Statistically, the average cost for each practitioner to purchase the necessary materials was 300 yuan, which would have been about 56 Canadian today, or 42 American. Which doesn't seem like a crazy amount. According to the police, from 1992 and 1999, Li Hongxi and his organization edited, published, and marketed so many publications, and they collected around 135 million yuan, which would have been about 25.5 million Canadian, or 19 million American. Millions of dollars collected in just 7 years. Now this isn't profit, but still, that is a large number. Just as a sidebar, to understand who Li Hongxi is, he taught that homosexuality makes one unworthy of being human and is comparable to organized crime. Li also stated in his 1998 speech in Switzerland that the gods' first target for annihilation would be homosexuals. People of the LGBTQ+ may join Falun Gong, but they must give up their bad conduct first. He also believes that each race will have their own heaven. He also states that excessive interest in politics is viewed as an attachment to worldly power and influence, which is a very hypocritical statement that I'll get into later. He also said in a Times magazine interview in 1999, "The aliens have introduced modern machinery, like computers and airplanes. They started by teaching mankind about modern science, so people will believe more and more science, and spiritually, they are controlled. Everyone thinks the scientists invent their own, when in fact the inspiration is manipulated by the aliens. In terms of culture and spirit, they already control man. Mankind cannot live without science. The ultimate purpose is to replace humans. If cloning human beings succeeds, the aliens can officially replace humans. Why does a corpse lie dead, even though it is the same as the living body? The difference is the soul, which is the life of the body. If people reproduce a human person, the gods in heaven will not give its body a human soul. The aliens will take that opportunity to replace a human soul, and by doing so, they will enter the earth and become earthlings." He later said he was being metaphorical in this whole spiel, but what? So after that little sidebar, I'd like to get back to why the Chinese Communist Party might have banned Falun Gong and its believers. In 2003, from May 25th to June 27th, Chen Fuzhou killed 16 people with rat toxin in order to, quote, enhance his gong powers, end quote. He did this in the name of Falun Gong. So Falun Gong does have a history in China of being more controversial than they let on. Some statistics released by the CCP state that over 1,500 people died because they refused medical treatments based on Falun Gong's teachings. They like to promote the fact that one day the government just banned them and started arresting them. However, the Chinese Communist Party also claims that it was the people's will that they did this. On June 17, 1996, Guangming Daily, one of the leading newspapers in China, published an article saying that the book, Zhuan Falan, written by Li Hongxi, is based on pseudoscience. In April 1998, Qilu Evening News, a local newspaper published in Shandong province, reported that some Falun Gong practitioners who died of illness because they refused medical treatment. A month later, Beijing television aired a segment about a doctoral candidate who had become paralyzed when he was practicing Falun Gong. In April 1999, Chinese scientist He Zuoxu criticized the Falun Gong in his article published by the Education College Journal of Tianjin Normal University. In retaliation, Li Hongxi organized non-approved protest outside the TV station, newspaper, office, and college campus. To maintain social stability and protect people's life and property, which is the government's main responsibility, the Chinese government banned the Falun Gong cult on July 22, 1999, according to the law, the spokesman said. So the Chinese Communist Party believes that they are a cult and are harmful to their people. They also said that the majority of Falun Gong practitioners were deceived by the cult and should be educated to free themselves from the cult's spiritual shackles. They say that the public demonstrations were not approved and that the protesters resorted to violence. The article also says, as to those who were sent to labor camps, the spokesman pointed out, those who disturbed social order, refused to break their ties with the cult, or committed cult-related crimes, would be sent to labor camps for transformation according to the law. They were sent there not because they practiced Falun Gong, but because they participated in illegal demonstrations that disturbed social order and the people's normal life as well. From what the spokesman says, it seems that the story that the government is going with is that Falun Gong is a horrible cult that is killing people, disturbing the peace, and should be expelled, and that their own people also wanted them expelled as well, and they, as the government, are just doing what the people want by banning this religion and arresting practitioners. But not all, just the ones who are really indoctrinated. And then on the other side, Falun Gong says, hey, we're peaceful and we are being unjustly persecuted in our homeland. Falun Gong also claim that organs are harvested from their people who are imprisoned in China. China is known for harvesting organs from their political prisoners, so it may have more truth to it than you would think. It's a lot of finger pointing and painting a bad picture of the other. Don't get me wrong, I'm no friend of the Chinese government, but it's really hard to tell who's in the wrong here, or if it's just at a point where both have done so much that the line has become way too blurred. All of this history and anger and hurt is also why it seeps into Shen Yun. Falun Gong as an organization have a lot to say and a lot of feelings that they can't say directly after being banned from their own country. This is probably why innocent people who go for just a fun night end up being slapped in the face with the religious and anti-Chinese government propaganda. I also found that on May 19, 2000, the United International World Buddhism Association headquarters held a world forum on Buddhism and Buddhist studies and the Buddha Dharma uprightness in Taiwan. The forum decided that Li Hongxi was a preacher of a cult and the doctrine of Li Hongxi was a cult. But notice that I didn't say Falun Gong. They think that specifically what Li Hongxi added to the religion is what made it a cult, which is an interesting distinction to make, and honestly one I personally agree with. Falun Gong as a practice or as a religion from any source seems wholesome, a way to get in touch with your spirituality and instill same personal morals other religions may do as well. But Li Hongxi added the negative parts to it that in more recent years, the aliens becoming a god and pushing his followers to do crazy protests, all of that was added later by Li. So with all of that out of the way, we get back to the namesake of this video, Shen Yun, who's created by Falun Gong as a way to preach and spread the word in 2006. The Chinese Communist Party actually banned Shen Yun from performing in China. They also seem to be fully aware of the connection that Shen Yun has to Falun Gong. Shen Yun is a performing arts troupe based in New York. They travel internationally producing dance performances and symphony concerts. Shen Yun is composed of 8 equally large performing arts companies. Shen Yun is operated by the Falun Gong New Religious Movement. The group's leader, Li Hongxi, resides in a compound named Dragon Springs near Deer Park, New York. This compound is where both him and his followers reside. Like anything good happens in a compound ever. Falun Gong followers pay rent for their performance venue, they help promote the show, and they sell tickets. The finances of Shen Yun and Falun Gong are linked. They're separate corporations, but they share funds, people, and a mission. Li Hongxi describes Shen Yun performances as a way to save audiences. Shen Yun only has shows in areas where there is a chapter of Falun Gong. Local chapters pay for the theater or stage for them to play and host receptions as well as the performance. Shen Yun is considered to be an outreach program for the religion of Falun Gong. When founded in 2006, the founder stated that the purpose of the company was to revive Chinese culture and traditions from a time before the Chinese Revolution. Some early names that they performed under around 2007 were Chinese Spectacular, Holiday Wonders, Chinese New Year Splendor, and Divine Performing Arts. Then they settled on Shen Yun. By 2009, approximately 1 million people had seen the troupe perform. They had developed 3 full companies and orchestras that tour the world simultaneously while producing a new show every year. During a show, the dance is the main attraction, performing mainly classical Chinese dances and acrobatics with gymnastics. They have insane, intricate costumes with a variety of props, depicting court dancers, soldiers, and characters from classic stories. Despite who funds them, the amount of Falun Gong messages, imagery, and stories is surprisingly low. During a 2010 production, only 2 of the 16 scenes depicted persecution of the Falun Gong practitioners. In a 2007 performance, they included a reference to a figure in Buddhism who turns the wheel of Dharma. In 2018 and 2019, performances included lyrics and displays disparaging atheism and a belief in evolution as deadly ideas. Some watchers of the show complained that at the end, it felt like propaganda rather than a presentation of cultural heritage like was advertised. Some reviews say anti-evolution, religious sermon, and cult propaganda. Most people agree that the show itself is pleasant to watch, but are annoyed that the vague advertising doesn't present the whole story of the Falun Gong's influence into the show. Walter Whitmore wrote in the Ledger, "We paid a premium for seats that would provide us an excellent view of Chinese tradition. Instead, we contributed unwillingly to a religious movement that denies evolution and science, claims that the earth was inhabited by aliens, demonizes atheists and homosexuals, and condemns mixed marriages," which does sum up their views as I reviewed earlier. Their performances are heavily influenced. Whether this influence comes from on stage or not seems to depend on the year. The fact that it has religious undertones isn't inherently a bad thing. What is more problematic is the lack of transparency. Transparency to the supporters and financial backers. Transparency to the religious undertones. Transparency to the propaganda that is included. That is what should be addressed. If they want to promote their religion through song and dance, go for it. More power to you. But don't advertise it that it is purely a story of Chinese tradition if it isn't. Oh, right. I mentioned earlier that excessive interest in politics is viewed as an unhealthy attachment in Falun Gong. Well, in 2000, Li created the Epoch Times, under this corporate umbrella that everything else is under. Anyway, the newspaper isn't anything special. It promotes Shen Yun a lot, and skews their views to be very far right, assuming to counter the far left government that hates them, but that's just my thoughts. Anyway, they are controlled and heavily influenced by Falun Gong and had an interesting role in the 2016 election. They spent over $2 million on Facebook ads for the former president, Donald Trump, second only to his own administration buying ads. They were pro-Trump and also included conspiracy theories about his competitors. In an NBC article, it states, a recent NBC News investigation revealed how the Epoch Times had evolved from a nonprofit newspaper that carried a Chinese-American religious movement, anti-communist message, into a conservative online news behemoth that embraced President Donald Trump and conspiracy content. The religious group that quietly operates the paper believes in a coming judgment day that will also send communists to hell, and says Trump is helping accelerate that timeline. Thanks for coming on this ride with me. I think it's really interesting to think about how religious companies have an influence on what seemingly are commercial companies. I think transparency would help with a lot of what is happening with Shen Yun and why people are angry in the reviews. If they were just honest and actually advertised what they were, maybe a lot of people would be more willing to go, or at least they would know what they were getting into. Anyway, if you like this video, like and subscribe. Until next time.